It was supposed to be a peaceful escape. That's what I told myself when I drove up the narrow, winding road to the little stone cottage, its moss-covered roof peeking through the trees like something from a postcard. I had been craving silence, silence for months. The city had worn me down. The constant noise, the deadlines, the endless emails. Here, I'd have nothing but the wind in the trees and the hum of my own thoughts. Or so I thought. The first night was colder than I expected. I'd unpacked just enough to make the bedroom livable: fresh sheets, my favorite blanket, a lamp on the bedside table. The rest of my things were still in boxes stacked in the corner. The wood floors groaned with every step, and the air smelled, faintly of cedar and dust, like the house hadn't been lived in for years. I fell asleep quickly, exhaustion from the move wrapping around me like a heavy quilt. But sometime in the dead of night, I woke up. Not because of a nightmare. Not because of the cold. Because I heard it. Emily. Just my name. Not loud, not whispered, spoken in the same tone someone might use to gently wake you. A tone that somehow felt wrong. I didn't move. My heart slammed hard against my ribs, and I stared at the ceiling, letting my ears strain into the darkness. The cottage was still too still. The kind of stillness that feels like it's waiting for something. I wanted to believe I dreamed. But the sound had been too real, too close. I told myself it could have been the wind. The wind through the trees, curling around the eaves of the house in just the right way to mimic speech. That happened, didn't it? I didn't move, didn't even breathe. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to swell, filling spaces they hadn't filled before. Minutes ticked by. I began to relax. My body, still tense, melted a little. Deeper into the mattress. My eyelids drooped. Emily. I sat bolt upright, my breath catching in my throat. The voice hadn't come from outside, it was inside the room. Closer, right at the edge of the bed. For a moment, I couldn't move, my body locked in the strange paralysis of panic. My hands clutched the blanket until my knuckles went white. The urge to turn on the lamp was overwhelming, but I was terrified of what I might see if I did. Finally, I forced my hand to move, fumbling for the switch. The click of the lamp sounded deafening in the silence, and the room was flooded with warm light. Nothing, just my half-unpacked boxes. The wardrobe in the corner, the curtains swaying slightly, from a draft I couldn't feel. I laughed, but it came out cracked, humorless. "You're losing it," I muttered to myself, as if saying it aloud could make it true. I lay back down, leaving the lamp on. Maybe I'd sleep with it on all week, but the air still felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to check the window. I slid out of bed, my bare feet cold against the wood, and padded to the curtain. When I pulled it aside, the glass reflected my pale, wide-eyed face back at me, superimposed over the trees outside. The woods loomed at the edge of the clearing, skeletal branches catching the moonlight like crooked fingers. I scanned the tree line, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. And then I froze. In the reflection, behind my own shoulder, a faint shadow stood. Tall, indistinct, impossible to focus on. I spun around, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The room was empty, and then, softer than before, right at my ear. "Emily." The whisper clung to me long after it faded. It felt like a thread still tied around my ear, an invisible connection I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried to tell myself it wasn't real. I stood frozen by the window, the curtain bunched in my hand, staring at nothing. My eyes kept darting to the corners of the room, half expecting that shadow from the reflection to seep out of the air and take form. When I finally moved, it was slow, deliberate. My hand found the curtain's edge and yanked it shut, blocking out the view of the skeletal trees and that faint, ghostly outline I'd imagined. Only, had I imagined it? The air inside the room felt colder now. My breath hung in faint clouds. In front of my face, like the kind of frost that creeps in at the start of winter. The lamp's light seemed weaker somehow, the glow not reaching the far edges of the room. My skin prickled as if the shadows were pressing closer. I needed a distraction. My phone was still on the bedside table, charging. I crossed the room quickly, snatching it up and letting the familiar glow of the screen give me something real to focus on. 3:33 a.m., a time that felt wrong somehow. Too exact, too deliberate. I hesitated over my contacts list, my thumb hovering above my sister's. Name? She'd pick up. She'd tell me it was nothing, that I was just overtired from the move, that maybe I'd been dreaming. But she'd also ask me why I moved out here alone. She'd say, "I told you so." I locked the phone and set it back down, forcing it. Shaky breath. "You're fine," I whispered to myself. "It's just an old house." That's when the lamp flickered. Once. Twice. The bulb hummed faintly, its light shivering like something had brushed against it. Then it went out. The sudden darkness punched the air from my lungs. My fingers scrambled for my phone again, thumb fumbling for the flashlight. The narrow beam cut a pale circle into the black, and I turned slowly, sweeping it across the room. Nothing, but then creak. The sound came from outside the bedroom door. Slow, deliberate. A weight shifting on the old wood of the hall floorboards. My chest tightened. My hand shook so badly the beam from the phone jittered over the walls. Creak, another step, closer this time. I backed away from the door, pressing myself toward the far wall. My heart was so loud in my ears, it almost drowned out the sound of the footsteps. Almost. The doorknob rattled. The metallic jingle was sharp and unnatural in the dead stillness. I froze in place, not daring to breathe. The knob twisted, then stopped. I could picture it, someone on the other side, testing the lock, deciding whether to come in, and then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but crowded, like the quiet is holding something back. I crept forward, my bare feet, whispering against the floor. Slowly, I lowered myself to my knees and pressed one ear against the door. The wood was cold against my skin. At first, I heard nothing. Then, a single wet drip. Another. It was the sound of water falling onto wood. Each drop slow, deliberate. My mind flashed with images of a leaking roof, but I knew there was no rain. And the drops, they seemed to be getting closer. I pulled back from the door, pulse pounding. My hand hovered over the lock. I didn't want to open it, but I needed to know. The metal was icy under my fingers as I turned it slowly, wincing at the faint click. I opened the door a few inches, just enough to let the phone's beam spill into the hallway. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Dark, wet, and bare. They started at the front door and stretched in a crooked path down the hallway straight toward my bedroom. The last print was right outside the door. I slammed it shut so fast the frame shuddered. The lock clicked back into place, my fingers trembling so violently I nearly missed it. That's when the voice came again. Emily. Only now it wasn't coming from the hall. It was inside the room. I spun, my phone's light swinging wildly, illuminating the bed, the wardrobe, the boxes in the corner. Nothing. And then warmth. A breath, brushing against the side of my neck. I didn't think. I couldn't. I bolted to the opposite wall, my back pressing so hard against it my shoulder blades ached. Who's there? My voice cracked too loud, bouncing off the walls. The answer was a low, rasping laugh, somewhere between a choke and a whisper. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, curling into my ears like smoke. You don't remember me, the voice said. Each word slow, deliberate, coated in something that made my skin crawl. My throat tightened. I don't know you. Oh. The tone curved upward, almost playful. You will. The shadows shifted, stretched, and in the far corner of the room where the light barely reached, something began to take shape. At first, I thought it was a trick of my eyes. The corner was the darkest part of the room, and the beam from my phone didn't quite reach it. My mind told me the shadows were simply piling up there, blending together into something vaguely human-shaped. But it didn't stay still. The shape was taller than the wardrobe and too thin, as if its bones were straining against skin that was stretched too tight. Its arms were long, hanging almost to where the floor met the wall, the fingers just brushing the wood. I couldn't see a face, but I felt the weight of its gaze. It did move closer. It didn't need to dot, it wanted me to see it. My throat went dry, my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. "What are you?" The words came out in a hoarse whisper. The thing didn't answer. Instead, it shifted, the movement fluid, but somehow wrong, as though its joints bent in ways they shouldn't. The air in the room thickened, pressing against me like an invisible tide. My chest felt tight, every breath a little harder than the last. The faint hum in the walls grew louder, like a distant swarm of insects. The shadow tilted its head. "Emily." The voice wasn't in the room this time, it was inside my head, brushing against my thoughts like icy fingertips. My knees buckled. I gripped the phone tighter, thumb trembling over the flashlight toggle, and finally forced myself to lift it. The beam of light cut across the floor, climbing the wall toward the corner. But when it reached the shape, it was gone. I swept the light frantically from one side of the room to the other, breathing fast and shallow. The wardrobe, the bed, the chair in the corner, all empty. But I knew it hadn't left. I could feel it. I backed toward the door again, my bare feet catching on the uneven floorboards. My eyes kept flicking toward the ceiling, half expecting something to crawl along it. The sound in the walls had faded, but my ears were ringing in the silence it left behind. I reached the door, hand on the lock, and hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the room, to run until the cottage was a speck in my rearview mirror. But the thought of stepping into the hallway where those wet footprints waited made my stomach churn. Then a sound, not the whisper this time, not the laughed out, it was soft, fragile, the sound of a child humming. It came from under the bed. I froze, every muscle locking tight. My phone felt like it was going to slip from my sweaty palm. The humming was slow, uneven, as if the singer didn't quite remember the tune. I lowered the light toward the floor. The beam caught on the hem of the blanket, then dipped lower, sliding into the shadow beneath the bed frame. My heart stuttered in my chest as the light revealed nothing. Just empty floorboards and dust. The humming stopped. Then the voice. "Emily." But this time, it was right next to my ear. I spun so fast, I almost fell, the light swinging wildly. Still nothing. But the warmth of breath on my skin told me it had been right there a moment ago. Something snapped inside me. I couldn't stay here another second. I yanked the door open and stepped into the hallway. The footprints were still there, glistening faintly in the dim light from my phone. They weren't as distinct now, edges blurring, as if they'd started to fade. I followed them to the front door. The lock was still in place, the chain still latched. No sign anyone had come inside, and yet the footprints existed. I stared at them, my pulse hammering in my ears. They began at the door, but there was no corresponding set leading back out. They ended in my room. I turned to look over my shoulder, back toward the open bedroom door. The air in the hallway seemed colder now, heavier. And there, just beyond the doorway, it was standing in the same corner as before. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. The phone's light trembled in my grasp, the beam landing briefly on the figure. I caught a glimpse this time skin, the color of ash, eyes like pits cut into stone, and a mouth that stretched wider than it should, curling upward in something too sharp to be called a smile. I bolted. The front door resisted for a moment, the chain catching and rattling before I tore it free. I didn't stop to grab shoes or a coat. I ran barefoot into the freezing night, the gravel cutting into my solace. The trees swallowed me quickly, their black silhouettes towering overhead. I didn't look back, didn't dare. My only thought was to get far enough away that I could no longer hear that voice. But I heard it anyway, soft, carried on the wind. "Emily." The night air sliced against my skin, sharp as glass. Bare branches clawed overhead, rattling in the wind like brittle bones. Gravel turned to packed dirt beneath my feet, cold mud squeezing between my toes. I didn't know where the path led, I just knew it was away from there. My breath came in short, ragged bursts, each exhale ghosting in the air before vanishing into the dark. I didn't dare use my phone's light. Something told me if I shone it behind me, I wouldn't like what I saw. The forest was not silent. Leaves hissed underfoot. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then fell silent, as if it, too, was listening. Twigs snapped in the distance, sharp enough to slice through the wind's constant moan. I slowed my pace, training my ears. It wasn't the snapping of branches from a deer or a fox too deliberate, too evenly spaced. It sounded like footsteps. Crunch dot pause dot crunch. I quickened my pace. The sound matched me. A wave of cold moved down my spine, and it wasn't the wind. My mind kept flashing to the thing's long arms, the ash-colored skin, the way it bent wrong. I told myself it couldn't. Follow me. That whatever it was tied to the cottage. But the forest didn't feel any safer. The path forked ahead, one side disappearing deeper into the black, the other winding toward the faint glow of the road. I didn't think. I veered toward the road. The glow grew brighter, a thin strip of orange from a distant street lamp. My lungs ached, my calves screaming with each step. I was almost there. Crunch. The sound was no longer behind me. It was beside me. I stopped dead. The wind hissed through the trees, tossing my hair into my face. The woods to my left gaped like a mouth, shadows writhing between the trunks. I told myself to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My feet felt rooted, my chest locked in a vice. And then it spoke. Emily. The voice was faint, but so close it might have been whispering from the hollow of the nearest tree. My knees gave out, and I caught myself on the frozen ground, dirt and leaves biting into my palms. My breathing came too fast now, the edges of my vision trembling. I turned my head slowly, knowing I shouldn't, knowing what I'd see. There it was, not 10 feet away, standing between two gnarled trunks, its body too thin to block the wind, but somehow breaking it all the same. Its head tilted as it stared at me, that unnatural grin still carved across its face. The branches around it trembled, though the air was still. It didn't step closer, but the forest seemed to bend toward. The shadows drawing inward, carrying me with them. My survival instincts snapped me free. I lurched to my feet and bolted for the road. My solace tore open on sharp stones, but I didn't care. The lamp's glow got stronger until I burst from the trees and staggered onto the asphalt. A car was coming. I waved my arms wildly, screaming for it to stop. Headlights flared as brakes squealed, the tires hissing against the wet pavement. The driver, a middle-aged man in a delivery uniform, threw his door open, eyes wide. Jesus, are you hurt? What happened? I opened my mouth to explain, but nothing coherent came out. Someone. I gestured wildly at the woods. He followed my gaze, frowning into the dark. You're alone out here? I nodded, shivering so hard my teeth clacked together. He hesitated, clearly torn between calling someone and getting me into the van. That's when we both heard it. Crunch from the trees. The driver's head snapped toward the sound. What the hell was that? I grabbed his arm. We need to go. Now. He didn't argue. He guided me into the passenger seat, shutting the door with a felt far too thin to keep anything out. The van's engine roared to life, headlights cutting a pale path down the road. But as we pulled away, I couldn't help looking back. There, at the very edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the street lamp, it stood, watching. And even through the glass, over the rumble of the engine, I heard it soft, threading through the noise like a needle through cloth. Emily. The driver dropped me off at the only 24-hour diner for miles. I sat in a booth, clutching a mug of coffee I didn't drink. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the cottage. I'd leave my things there. Call my sister, get a hotel until I figured out what to do. But as the hours passed, something strange happened. The air in the diner grew heavy. My reflection in the window began to look wrong. The background behind it didn't match the diner anymore. And in the glass, just over my shoulder, a shadow leaned in. The coffee had gone cold, but I kept holding the mug like it might anchor me. Steam no longer rose from it, just the faint smell of burnt grounds clinging to the air. The diner was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, and the occasional clink of silverware from a trucker sitting 2 booths away. The waitress had disappeared into the back, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my reflection. I kept my eyes down, but every so often they flicked upward, against my will, toward the glass. Outside, the parking lot's lone street lamp lit the empty asphalt in a pale orange cone. Beyond that, nothing but the black mouth of the road and the tree line. But my reflection was wrong. It mirrored my movements, yes, but the background behind it didn't show the street lamp or the asphalt. It showed darkness. The kind of darkness from the cottage hallway, thick and swallowing. And in that darkness, it was there. Not standing. Behind me, exactly leaning in. Like a person about to whisper something into your ear, but from just beyond the glass, its eyes were hollow, but not empty. They seemed to churn, the way smoke curls in a jar. I gripped the mug harder. My pulse thudded in my ears. I turned my head to glance over my shoulder in the real diner, not the reflection. Nothing. Just the booth's red, vinyl backrest, and the faint smell of fried onions from the kitchen. But when I looked back at the glass, it smiled, not the warped grin from before. This one was smaller, patient, like it knew something I didn't. "Emily," the glass whispered. The voice didn't carry through the diner, it came through the glass. Like the sound was trapped in there with my reflection. My knuckles went white on the mug's handle. The waitress returned, a steaming plate of fries balanced in one hand. "Here you go, you look like you've seen a ghost." I nearly laughed at that, but the sound caught in my throat. I'm fine," she frowned. "You sure? You're pale as a sheet." I stopped, glancing at the window again. The reflection was normal now. Just me. "Yes," I said. "I'm fine." She hesitated, but moved on to check the trucker's coffee. I pushed the fries away, my stomach knotted too tightly to eat. Then my phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Emily." The voice was the same. Low, close. I hung up immediately. My hands shook so badly the phone clattered against the table. The trucker glanced over. "You okay, miss?" I nodded without meeting his eyes. "Yeah, just tired." I should have left right then, called a cab, walked to the nearest motel. Anything. But instead I sat there staring at my phone until the waitress brought the check. The total was scrawled in neat handwriting, and beneath it, in different ink, 2 words. "You remember." My skin prickled. "Excuse me, did you write this?" The waitress leaned over, squinting. "Write what?" I slid the receipt toward her. The extra words were gone. I left a crumpled bill on the table and walked out into the cold. The street lamp buzzed overhead as I crossed the lot. My breath rose in clouds. The woods loomed just beyond the light's reach. Something moved in them. Not a person. Not an animal. The trees seemed to shift, making space for something tall and thin to step forward, yet it never quite broke the tree line. I didn't realize I'd stopped walking until my skin started to sting from the cold. My eyes locked on the shape in. The shadows. And then memory hit me like someone had pressed a knife into the back of my mind and twisted. I was 10 years old, playing in my grandmother's garden. The air smelled of lilacs. There had been a shadow at the edge of the property just beyond the fence. I'd watched it for hours, waiting for it to move. It never had, but I'd known. It was watching me. That night, in my bed, I'd heard the whisper for the first time. "Emily." I told myself it was a dream. But in the morning, there had been wet footprints on my floor. And now, here it was again. The buzzing street lamp. Flickered, dimmed, and went out. The parking lot plunged into darkness. I didn't move. My eyes had adjusted just enough to see the figure stepping forward. The voice came again closer this time. "You remember." I turned and ran. The cold air sliced my lungs as I tore. Down the empty road, shoes slapping against the wet pavement. The diner's glow shrank behind me, swallowed by the dark. There was no plan, just run. Keep moving, get away. But the voice followed. "Emily." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was in my ears, in my skull, curling into the folds of my mind like smoke slipping through cracks. The road bent sharply, and for a second, I thought I saw a headlight's salvation, but it was only the moon breaking through the clouds. The sound of footsteps joined mine. They weren't pounding like mine. They were slow, deliberate, as if it knew no matter how fast I went, it would catch me. I pushed harder, my legs screaming. My breath turned to knives in my throat, and then I tripped. The asphalt shredded my palms and tore my knee open. Pain flared, but I scrambled up anyway, stumbling into the ditch beside the road. My foot sank into wet leaves as I plunged into the trees. The forest swallowed me instantly. The branches knit overhead, blocking the moon. I ran blind, each step a gamble on whether I'd hit solid ground or an unseen route. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy. My pulse pounded in my ears until it sounded like distant drums. Then movement, not footsteps this time. The sound of something sliding through the undergrowth, too large to be an animal, too quiet to be human. I froze, pressing myself against the trunk of a tree. My breath came fast and shallow, my fingers digging into the rough bark. A shape emerged between the trees. It wasn't walking. It was unfolding like it had been part of the forest all along, and now it was stepping free. Ash-colored skin, limbs too long. The grin, stretching until it almost split the head in two. Its eyes smoke and hunger swirling inside fixed on me. "Emily," it said again. Only this time there was more. You called me. My mouth went dry. You were a child, it said, voice like dead leaves sliding over stone. You stood in the garden. You watched the shadows. You wanted to know what was in them. The memory struck me again, sharper, now the fence, the dark shape beyond it. My young self whispering into the night, "If you're real, come closer." My stomach dropped. That wasn't you invited me. It stepped closer, and the tree seemed to pull back for it. I've been with you ever since. Waiting, watching, whispering. I stumbled backward until my heel hit a root and I went down. Why? What do you want? Its grin widened. I want what you offered. I didn't. You did. Its voice was patient now, like a teacher explaining something simple to a stubborn child. An invitation is a bond. A promise I am here to collect. It knelt. Its knees bent the wrong way. Its face lowered to mine until the smell of damp earth and rot filled my nose. Say it whispered. The world around us seemed to dim. The wind stopped. The forest noises faded until there was nothing but my heartbeat and its breath. I don't remember what I said. You do, it said, and its smoke-filled eyes pulled me under. The memory came, my 10-year-old self leaning over the fence, whispering into the dark. I'm lonely. Will you be my friend? The thing's grin was almost tender now. And I am the only friend you have ever truly had. And I will never leave. I shook my head. No. Its voice deepened. There is no. It reached out. Its fingers, too many joints, brushed my cheek. My skin burned where it touched. Something in me snapped, not courage, not exactly, but a raw, desperate refusal. I wrenched away and ran. The forest seemed to tilt around me, branches clawing at my clothes, roots grabbing my ankles. The thing's voice followed, no longer a whisper, but a roar that rattled the ground. Emily. I burst from the trees into the road again, nearly colliding with a pickup truck. Brakes screamed, tires slid, and the driver, a woman in her 30s, threw the door open. Jesus, get in. I didn't hesitate. I climbed in, slamming the door. She hit the gas, the truck lurching forward. As we sped away, I looked back. The thing stood at the edge of the road, exactly where the shadows ended. Watching, waiting. The driver glanced at me. What the hell was that back there? I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, because saying it aloud would make it real. Instead, I stared ahead, telling myself over and over that I was safe now. But deep down, I knew. You can't outrun something you invited in. I've always been cursed with light sleep. Not the dreamy kind of half sleep where you drift in and out like a lazy tide, but the kind where your brain is a motion sensor alert to every creak, tap, or muffled cough from the world around you. My body seems convinced I live in a war zone. A floorboard settling in the middle of the night, eyes open, a car door slamming 2 streets away. I'm awake, heart already in my throat. So when I first heard the bell, I thought nothing of it. It was faint, so faint, I almost believed it had come from my own mind. A soft, delicate chime carried to me on the thin summer breeze slipping through my open window. The kind of sound you expect from a child's bicycle bell, or maybe a hand bell, rung by some eccentric neighbor. I didn't get up, didn't even roll over. My brain cataloged it as harmless, stamped it with the mental label of irrelevant, and I pulled the blanket tighter over my shoulder. Somewhere far away, the sound had already faded. The second night was different. It came again, same tone, same timbre, but louder. Not enough to be alarming, just enough. Enough to notice that it wasn't quite right. It didn't come in a rhythm like church bells or passing cyclists. It wasn't the bright, eager ding-ding of a delivery bike making its way down the street. It was one note, one perfectly measured chime. A pause, then another. I sat up, my ears straining. The pause between the rings was unnatural, almost deliberate, as though someone were holding the bell, waiting, watching. Each metallic tone cut through the night air and hung there, suspended, refusing to be absorbed into the quiet. Still, I told myself it was nothing. A neighbor testing something. A cat knocking into some porch decoration. I'd heard stranger things at night and lived to tell about them. But lying back down, I realized the sound was sticky. Not literally, but in the way it clung to my mind, looping endlessly in the spaces between thoughts. The third night, I was ready for it. Not consciously, I didn't sit in the dark with my ear to the wall, but something in me was braced for it. The moment it came, my eyes snapped open. My heart gave a single solid thud like the opening strike of a drum. Chime. This time there was no pretending it was far away. The tone was sharp, clean, and far too close to dismiss. I sat up fully, tossing the blanket aside. My feet touched the cold wood of the floor, and I froze, listening. The apartment was silent. The kind of silence that felt aware, like the air itself was holding its breath. I whispered a small, foolish hello into the dark. No answer. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it when it came again, slightly louder, slightly nearer, as if the distance between it and me had shrunk by a handful of careful steps. The sound didn't just enter my ears, it settled in me, vibrating faintly against the inside of my skull. My skin prickled, my throat dry. Without realizing it, I found my hand hovering near the bedroom door handle, my body torn between fight and flight. The hallway beyond was pitch black. I knew the light switch was inches away, but something deep in me, the old animal part, didn't want to see what the light might reveal. The quiet stretched. My breathing was too loud in my own head. Time. This time, it wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't muffled by walls or distance. It was inside. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, each strand a needle prick against my skin. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. My muscles refused to cooperate, my pulse thudding against my ribs like it wanted out. I swallowed, the sound loud in the stillness, and stepped into the hallway. The air felt not colder, exactly, but heavier, like walking into a room where someone has been standing perfectly still for hours just waiting. The faint hum of the fridge at the far end of the apartment was my only companion. My eyes strained against the dark, desperate to pick out familiar shapes. Something shifted at the far end. Not much, just enough to convince me I wasn't alone. Chime. The note rolled through me, deep enough to make my teeth ache. My breath hitched, and before I realized what I was doing, my fingers slammed the light switch upward. A weak yellow glow flickered to life, spilling across the hall. Nothing. The shadows that had moments ago seemed to stretch and breathe, now hung limply in corners. Nothing more than shapes on the wall. My laugh was thin, shaky. "You're losing." I muttered. But even as I said it, the bell rang again. Only now it sounded like it was in the next room. I didn't move at first. The bell sound lingered in the apartment, faintly shimmering in the air as if it were refusing to fade completely. It was the kind of tone you could almost believe was still ringing even after it stopped, like when you hear a song on repeat, and swear you can still hum it an hour later. Only this wasn't my mind replaying it. This was real. I stepped slowly toward the living room. The light from the hallway barely reached the edges of the space, and my lamp, my one reliable source. Of warm, safe, glow sat dark and cold on the table. Another chime rang out, softer this time, but the direction was unmistakable. It came from the far corner of the living room, where shadows gathered in a tangle. I flicked the switch on the wall. Nothing happened. The bulb had burned out, or maybe the power to that outlet was dead. The air felt thicker here, as though each breath I took was pushing against something invisible. My skin prickled, my shoulders tightening on their own. The bell rang again. I couldn't see it, couldn't see anything, but my eyes strained toward that corner as if sheer willpower could pry the dark apart. The sound was so close now that I thought I might reach out and touch the source if I dared to cross the room. That was when I realized the chimes were wrong. When you hear a bell, you expect a vibration, a lingering note that trails off into silence. These didn't fade naturally. They cut off, sharp, as if someone had placed a hand over the bell. Mid-ring, someone was controlling it. And if someone was controlling it, they were here. The thought tightened around my lungs like wire. I took one cautious step forward, and the shadows in the corner seemed to shift. Not move exactly, but adjust, as though something inside them had changed its posture. I froze. The chime came again, but now it was paired with something else, an almost imperceptible scrape, like metal brushing against wood. My gaze dropped, and in the faint spill of hallway light, I caught the smallest glint of reflection. Eyes. Not wide, startled eyes. Not human eyes. These were fixed, deliberate, unblinking two glassy points, set at a height that was just slightly too low to belong to an adult standing. They didn't blink. They didn't shift. They just watched. I don't remember deciding to move, but I found myself backing toward the hallway, keeping my eyes locked on that corner. The distance between me and it grew, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. Once I was back in the hallway, I reached out without looking and flicked the switch again, killing the weak light. It was pitch black now, and the next chime didn't come from the living room. It came from the hallway just a few feet in front of me. I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. My hand scraped against the rough paint as I scrambled to find the other switch, the one for my bedroom. The light flared on, harsh and immediate, burning away the dark. The hallway was empty. My pulse pounded so loud that it drowned out the hum of the bulb. I stood there, staring into the empty space, willing myself to believe I'd imagined it. But then something small and metallic rolled gently across the floor, from the darkness of the hallway into the spill of bedroom light. It was a brass bell, old, tarnished, the kind you'd picture on a store counter in some sleepy, dust-covered town. It stopped just shy of my bare foot, and then it rang without anyone touching it. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the brass bell at my feet. It wasn't ringing anymore. It just sat there, as still and harmless looking as any inanimate object could. But I couldn't shake the memory of the sound, how sharp it had been, how it had seemed to pass straight through my skin and rattle around inside my bones. I nudged it lightly with my toe. It didn't move much, just a lazy tilt before settling again. No sound. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. The apartment was still too still. I stepped back into my bedroom and shut the door, pressing the lock with my thumb. It was a flimsy lock, the kind you could pop open with a paperclip, but it made me feel marginally safer. I got back into bed, pulled the covers up, and told myself that come morning I'd throw the bell in the dumpster out back and forget this ever happened. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes sounded louder now, as though the quiet was amplifying them just to test me. My eyes stayed fixed on the sliver of light under the door, waiting for the unmistakable shadow of feet to appear. At some point, I must have drifted off because when the chime came again, it ripped me out of sleep like a bucket of cold water. The sound wasn't muffled by distance this time. It was inside the room. I bolted upright, my heart a solid hammer in my chest. The bell sat neatly on the nightstand beside me. I hadn't brought it in here. I knew I hadn't. It rang again, the note sharp and clean. My skin crawled so hard I thought it might tear itself off me. The sound was exactly the same as before, perfectly measured. No vibration trailing off. My throat felt tight. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't leave it there either. With a shaky hand, I grabbed it, trying not to let my skin make too much contact with the cold brass. It was heavier than I expected. I stood, marched to the window, and shoved it open. The night air hit me like a damp cloth, carrying the faint hum of the city in the distance. I leaned out and tossed the bell as far as I could into the alley below. I shut the window, locked it, and didn't look outside again. Back in bed, I sat in the dark, waiting. Minutes ticked by, each one an hour. In my mind, then chime? The sound came from under the bed. My whole body locked up. I didn't want to look. Every cell in me screamed, don't look. But my hand, acting on some slow, awful instinct, reached for the edge of the bed. Another chime, louder now. I bent down, peering into the darkness beneath. Two pale shapes caught the faint light from the street lamp outside, two small, bare feet. They were pointed toward me. I jerked back so fast I slammed my head into the wall. Pain flared hot and sharp, but I barely felt it over the adrenaline. Screaming through my veins, the feet moved, slowly, deliberately. They drew back into the shadows, and the bell rang once more, crisp and final. The next sound was worse than the chime. It was breathing, not the slow, steady breathing of someone asleep, but shallow, eager breaths, and they were right beneath me. I didn't stay. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and I ran barefoot, pajamas flapping against my legs, out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the street. I didn't look back until I was 3 blocks away. Even then, I could swear I heard it again. Chime. I didn't go back that night. I ended up in a cheap motel 2 neighborhoods away, one of those places where the carpet feels sticky no matter what you wear on your feet, and the TV remote is missing half the buttons. But the walls were thick enough to muffle the city noise, and most importantly, there were no bells. Still, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the moment under the bed, the way those pale feet pulled back into the shadows, as if they were retreating only to lunge later. My ears wouldn't stop straining for a sound that wasn't there. By morning, my rational brain was clawing its way back in. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I dreamed more than I remembered. I told myself I'd just grab a few things from the apartment clothes, essentials, my laptop, and crash somewhere else until I figured out what to do next. The street outside my building was quiet when I returned. No curious neighbors peeking out of windows, no police tape. Whatever had happened last night was mine alone. The apartment door was still locked. I hesitated, key hovering over the handle, before finally pushing it in. The air inside felt untouched. No scent of dust or rot. No sign that anyone or anything had moved around in my absence. Until I saw it. The brass bell sat on the kitchen counter, right in the middle. It was perfectly still, but my stomach turned at the sight of it. I could have sworn there was a faint smudge on the metal, like the print of a small hand. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, and the chime rang out. The sound was the same at first, sharp, but as it faded, I realized it wasn't fading alone. Under the ring, just barely audible, was something else. A low, drawn-out whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely speech, and it wasn't my imagination. I could feel the vibration of it in my bones like the sound was, bypassing my ears entirely. I froze, listening. The whisper bled into the silence, curling under the edges of the room like smoke. I leaned in against my better judgment and caught something, one word, stretched and warped. down. The chime rang again, louder this time, and the whisper followed immediately. Down, here. My eyes darted toward the floor. The linoleum by the counter seemed darker in one spot, as if a faint shadow was pooling there. I backed away, the skin of my nape tightening. The bell rang a third time, and this time the whisper wasn't stretched. It was sharp, urgent. Look. Against every screaming instinct in my body, my gaze dropped to that shadow. And in the darkness pooling there, just at the point where it met the base of the counter, 2 fingers slid out, thin, pale, too long. They curled, beckoning. The bell rang again, but the sound was wrong now, off pitch, almost wet, like the tone had been smothered in something thick. The fingers withdrew, vanishing into the shadow as if pulled back by an unseen force. The room fell silent. I didn't move for a long time. Then I did the only thing my brain could produce. I grabbed the nearest towel, threw it over the bell without touching it, and backed toward the door. I didn't care if I left everything else behind. I wasn't staying. As I turned to leave, the bell rang again, muffled under the towel, followed by a whisper. So clear it could have been spoken into my ear. Don't leave me. I didn't stop moving until I was back outside, sunlight hitting me like a slap. It was one of those pale, hazy mornings where the air feels heavier than it should. As if it knows you're trying to breathe easy and refuses to let you. I shoved the apartment keys deep into my pocket and started walking. Not toward the motel. I wasn't going back there. I wanted distance. Blocks between me and that building. Miles, if I could manage it. I ended up in a little coffee shop on the far end of town. The place was nearly empty. Just a man reading the paper in the corner and a barista whose eyes were glued to her phone. Perfect. I picked a table by the window, ordered something hot just to keep my hands busy, and told myself I'd call a friend for help once I'd calmed down. For the first 10 minutes, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. Then the bell rang. It was soft, almost polite, just a single chime. My heart jerked hard enough to make my vision flash. I turned, scanning the shop. No one had a bell. No one seemed to have heard it. But when I looked back at my table, it was there, the brass bell, sitting neatly beside my coffee. I pushed back from the table so fast the chair screeched against the floor. The man with the paper looked up, annoyed. I stammered something about forgetting an appointment, grabbed my bag, and left without touching the coffee or the bell. Outside, the street was louder, safer. I walked fast, trying to lose myself in the crowd, but my ears kept straining for that sound. 5 blocks later, it came again. Chime. This time it came from inside my bag. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. People brushing past me with irritated mutters. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the zipper open. Inside, right on top of my wallet, sat the bell. I didn't think I just hurled the whole bag into the nearest trash. Bin and started running. I didn't care about my phone, my money, anything. I just wanted away. I made it another mile before I had to stop to catch my breath. I was in a park now, a wide green stretch with kids playing and dogs barking. Normal life. Ordinary noise. I sat on a bench, hunched forward, trying to steady my pulse. I'd figure something out. I'd leave town. I de-chime. It was right next to me on the bench. The bell, this time the whisper followed immediately. So close it was almost inside my head. My name, I froze. The sound of my own name made my stomach drop as if the ground had tilted. It said it again. My name. Down here. I refused to look, but my peripheral vision caught movements. Something shifting inside the reflection of the brass. Not just light or shadow, but features. The vague outline of a face, pale and wrong, pressed just beneath the surface like someone peering up from deep water. Stay? It whispered. I stood so fast the bench rocked backward. My legs carried me without direction, away from the bell, away from the voice, though somewhere deep in my chest. I knew I wasn't actually going anywhere it couldn't follow. And I was right, because even over the noise of the park, even as I pushed through strangers and ducked behind trees, I could hear it, Faint, insistent, and patient. Chime. By the time I stumbled back onto the street, I'd stopped caring who saw me or what I looked like. I must have seemed drunk or deranged, wild-eyed, muttering under my breath, constantly glancing over my shoulder, but it didn't matter. The chime had followed me across the park. It followed me down the avenue. It followed me into the crush. Of people at the subway entrance, each tone cutting clean through the roar of traffic and footsteps like it was meant only for me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to move. My thoughts had shrunk down to 2 words, not here. The subway car was nearly empty when I boarded. I sat at the far end, pressed into the corner, and wrapped my arms around myself. No bell, no whisper. Maybe I'd lost it. Chime? I looked down. The brass bell sat neatly on the seat beside me, unmoving, but somehow expectant. The whisper came instantly. You hear me? I shut my eyes, pressing my palms hard over my ears, but the voice didn't fade, it got clearer. I've been calling. I forced myself to look. The bell was trembling now, vibrating in place, the way a phone hums when a call comes through. You dropped me, it said, the words sliding directly into my thoughts. You threw me. That's not how. This works. My stomach lurched. What are you? I asked, my voice low, shaky. The bell gave one crisp chime in response, and then something began to push. It came from inside the bell, something pressing against the inner surface, distorting the brass, as though the metal were soft as wax. A bulge formed, then another, each swelling and retreating in a sick rhythm, like fingers drumming from the inside. I stood, ready to bolt, but the subway car's lights flickered, and in that split second of darkness I saw it. Not in the bell, but through it. A narrow, impossible space, stretching far down, like looking into the mouth of a well that had no bottom. And far, far below, something pale was climbing. I couldn't see its full shape, just arms, too long, jointed wrong, pulling it upward hand over hand. Its head tilted back as it climbed, and I caught the glint of eyes, small, reflective, fixed directly on me. The lights came back, and the vision snapped away. The bell sat motionless again, innocent. As ever, almost there, the whisper said. I lunged for the opposite end of the car, heart pounding so hard I thought I might black out. But train screeched to a halt at the next station. I didn't wait for the doors to fully open. I shoved them apart and staggered onto the platform. I didn't have a plan. I only knew I had to get rid of it. Permanently, I ran up the stairs, through the turnstile, out into the street again. There was construction ahead, an open trench in the asphalt, deep enough that the street lamps barely lit the bottom. Without thinking, I grabbed the bell and hurled it as hard as I could into the darkness. I never heard it hit the ground. Just a single chime. And then, from somewhere far below, an answering sound like many bells, all ringing at once. The whisper came one last time, and now it wasn't soft or sly. It was joyful. We're here. The ground beneath my feet shuddered. Somewhere deep in that trench, something began to climb. The first time it happened, I was so sure I'd imagined it that I almost laughed. A faint whiff of lavender and roses, so delicate it could have been a trick of my mind. I was standing in my childhood home's living room, unpacking boxes and brushing years of dust off the mantle when it drifted past me. It hit me in a way nothing else could have. That scent, soft, floral, comforting, wasn't just perfume. It was her perfume. The same blend I'd buried my face in when I hugged my grandmother as a little kid. The same scent that had been sealed away forever when she was buried 5 years ago. I froze, one hand still clutching a rag, my mind racing. No, that was impossible. I shook it off, muttered something about dusty furniture to no one in particular, and forced myself to get back to work. But that night, long after the sun had gone down and the house had settled into its old creaks and sighs, the smell came back. Stronger this time. And this time there was no pretending. I sat on the couch, every muscle in my body tense, my eyes fixed on the darkened corners of the room. The scent wasn't just hanging there, or it was moving, drifting through the air like an invisible hand guiding it. I wrapped my arms around myself and whispered, "Grandma." The word felt foolish as soon as it left my lips. No answer came only. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the faint creak of wood somewhere deep in the house. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe something in the boxes smelled like her. Maybe the old curtains had absorbed the scent years ago. But none of that made sense because the perfume wasn't static. It was traveling, winding its way toward the staircase as if it wanted me to follow. I stood, brushing my hands down my Jean, trying to steady my breathing. The scent thickened, pulling me forward step by step until I reached the base of the stairs. Something flickered at the edge of my vision. A shadow small, brief at the bottom step. I turned sharply. Nothing. There. The glow from the corner lamp painted everything in the same warm gold as before, unchanged. But the smell was stronger now, pooling near the staircase like it was waiting. A quiet, icy feeling crawled down my spine. I didn't want to go upstairs. Every instinct told me not to. But something else, deep and stubborn inside me, kept nudging me forward. The wooden banister was cold under my hand, too cold. I took the first step, my heart thudding so hard it echoed in my ears. The higher I climbed, the heavier the perfume became, until it filled my nose, my throat, my lungs. Halfway up, I stopped. Dead. From the far end of the upstairs hallway came a faint shuffle, slow, dragging, like slippers scuffing against the floor. My grandmother's slippers? I gripped the banister tighter and climbed the rest of the way, each creak of the stairs sounding too loud in the stillness. At the top, the air felt different, thinner, colder. My grandmother's old bedroom door was slightly ajar, darkness spilling through the narrow gap. I swallowed hard and reached for the knob. My hand trembled so much I could barely keep my grip. As I pushed the door open, the perfume surged around me, a thick wave of lavender and roses so strong it made my head swim. And there, by the window, the rocking chair my grandmother had always sat in began to move, slow, creaking, back and forth. I froze. The perfume was strongest here, suffocating in its sweetness. Shadows shifted against the walls like something alive. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the chair stopped. The air went still, and I felt someone standing directly behind me. The scent lingered like a memory refusing to fade, curling into my lungs with each breath until I felt wrapped in it. I stood in the middle of the living room, my hand still frozen mid-reach toward a half-unpacked box. The lavender and rose blend was unmistakable, like grandmother's signature perfume. For years after her funeral, I tried to recall the exact fragrance and failed, always coming close, but never capturing it fully in my mind. Yet here it was, perfect, like she'd just walked past me. That was impossible. I told myself it was nothing, some stray scent clinging to the old curtains, or maybe one of the boxes had absorbed it years ago. But the longer I stood there, the more certain I became this wasn't some fading remnant. It was fresh, present, moving, it drifted toward the stairs. Invisible but tangible, a lure drawing me in despite every instinct screaming not to follow. I swallowed hard. Grandma? The name felt strange on my tongue after so many years, and the sound of my own voice in the stillness made my pulse quicken. No answer came, only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the house settling into its bones. The perfume pulled at me. I stepped toward the staircase, each footfall soft but deliberate. The scent grew stronger, wrapping itself around me until I could almost feel the weight of her presence beside me. Halfway up, I hesitated. My hand gripped the banister, cold and damp beneath my fingers, as though the wood itself recoiled from my touch. At the top, the air shifted. Heavier, thicker. Her bedroom door stood slightly ajar, spilling a thin line of darkness into the hallway. That room had been left untouched since she passed by unspoken agreement. No one disturbed it. I reached for the doorknob, my palms slick with sweat. The scent surged as I pushed it open, spilling into me like a wave I couldn't step back from. The first thing I saw was the rocking chair. It moved slowly, creaking back and forth in the dim light. I froze. That chair had been her morning ritual. She'd sit there with her knitting, a blanket over her knees, humming softly to herself. Seeing it in motion now, with no one in it, was like watching a memory come to life without consent. The perfume was nearly suffocating, the sweetness curdling into something oppressive. I couldn't move, couldn't look away, until the chair stilled and the air in the room seemed to hold its breath. Behind me, the atmosphere shifted again. Something was there. The weight of its presence pressed into my back, making my skin prickle. My breath caught in my throat, every nerve screaming not to turn around. But I did. The space was empty in a way that felt wrong, as if whatever had been there had simply stepped sideways into the shadows. My eyes darted to the knitstand, and that's when I saw it. A small glass bottle, her perfume. I knew it couldn't be here. I'd watched it be placed in the coffin, tucked between her folded hands before the lid closed forever. But here it sat, delicate and whole, the glass. Catching a faint glimmer of moonlight, I reached for it. The chill of it bit into my skin, unnatural in a warm room. The scent intensified, swirling tighter around me, until it was all I could taste. The rocking chair creaked again. My head snapped toward it just as a voice slid. Through the stillness. Why? The word was soft, familiar, but warped like hearing her speak through water. The bottle slipped from my fingers, rolling under the bed without shattering. I backed toward the door, heart hammering, but before I could touch the knob, it slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. The chair stopped moving. The scent thickened into something almost solid, filling my lungs until I coughed. Shadows in the corner of the room stretched upward, knitting together into a shape that flickered like a dying flame. She stepped out. Of them, or rather something wearing her shape did. The cardigan was hers. The clasped hands, the tilt of her head, even the faint outline of her bun, it was all familiar. But her face was wrong, blurred, unfocused, as if my eyes couldn't fully decide where her features belonged. And her eyes, deep, black, and empty. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. My back hit the wall. "Grandma? What's happening? What do you want?" Her head tilted farther than it should have. "It's not about what I want. It's about what the house demands." The words slid into me like ice water. She drifted closer, her form glitching at the edges, and the air around me dropped to a biting cold. "The house holds its debts," she continued. "It keeps its promises. Now it's your turn." "I don't understand," I stammered. "What debt?" It chose you," she interrupted, her voice rising, splintering into something. Sharp, just like it chose me. Something in my chest cracked at the realization. She hadn't stayed in this house by choice all those years. She hadn't been devoted to it. She'd been trapped. And now, so was I. The shadows surged, crawling up my legs like vines. I clawed at the wall, searching for the doorknob that no longer existed. "I won't stay," I gasped. "You don't have a choice?" she whispered, so close I could feel the cold of her words against my cheek. The room spun. My vision narrowed to the faint rocking of the chair, the perfume thick in my lungs, the shadows swallowing me whole. Then darkness. When I came to, I was on the floor in the living room. My head throbbed as if I'd been asleep for days, my throat raw with the ghost of that suffocating perfume. The moonlight spilling in through the window was faint, and everything felt still, too still. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing until I realized my grandmother. As perfume bottle sat on the coffee table in front of me. It was upright, perfectly centered, the glass gleaming faintly. I scrambled backward, my hand knocking into one of the unopened moving boxes. It tumbled over, spilling books across the rug, but my eyes never left that bottle. It hadn't been. In the living room before, something had moved it here. I didn't touch it. Instead, I stood and backed toward the front door, my mind whispering the only logical answer. Leave. Just leave. But when I reached the door and turned the handle, it didn't budge. I twisted harder, pulling with both hands until my knuckles went white. The lock was gone, completely gone. The brass mechanism that had been there earlier that day wasn't just broken or stuck. It was absent, as if the wood had grown over it. My pulse thundered in my ears. I tried the back door. Same thing. Handle. Intact. But no lock, no latch, nothing to release. The windows? I grabbed the nearest one and shoved upward. It rattled in place, but the glass refused to give, like it was part of the wall itself. I tried again, harder. The frame groaned but stayed shut, mocking me. It was then I realized something worse. The moon outside looked wrong. Too bright, too large. I stepped back from the glass, heart pounding. The world beyond the windows was a painted stillness, no swaying trees, no shifting shadows, no clouds crossing the sky. Just a perfect, unmoving night, like a photograph hung beyond the glass. And behind me, that scent. It curled into the room again, heavy and deliberate. I turned slowly, dread settling in my stomach like lead. The bottle on the coffee table was gone. A faint creak came from upstairs. No, I whispered, backing toward the wall. I'm not going up there again. But the scent grew stronger, each breath tasting sweeter, heavier, until it was impossible to ignore. Something wanted me upstairs, and the harder I resisted, the more suffocating it became. I pressed my sleeve to my nose and fought the urge to gag. The house was forcing me. The stairs loomed in front of me before I even realized I'd moved. I gripped the railing, each step groaning under my weight, the air growing colder as I climbed. Halfway up, I heard its soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone running their nails gently along the wall. I swallowed hard and kept moving. The sound followed me, matching my pace, until I reached the landing. The hallway stretched longer than it had before. I blinked hard, thinking my vision was playing tricks, but the end of it really did seem farther away, the shadows pooling thick around. The edges, the tapping stopped. From the far end came a faint voice. You're late. It was hers again, warped, hollow, but still my grandmother's. The door to her bedroom was wide open now, shadows spilling across the hall in slow, crawling patterns. I stepped inside, every muscle tense. The rocking chair was moving again, but this time it wasn't empty. She sat there, knitting in her lap, head bowed as if concentrating. The cardigan, the slippers, the soft bun pinned neatly perfect. But her skin was pale and waxy, her fingers twitching too fast for human movement. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I didn't need to. My body knew whatever was sitting there wasn't her. Why am I here? I asked, my voice barely. Above a whisper, she didn't look up. Because you belong here now, the house has marked you. I don't belong to this place. I didn't choose this. Neither did I, she said, and the knitting needles stopped mid-click. Her head lifted slowly, far too slowly, until her eyes, black and depthless, locked onto mine. But once it takes you in, it never lets you go. I stepped back, my heel hitting something solid. A hand. It shot out from under the bed, ice cold. Fingers curling around my ankle with impossible strength. I screamed, kicking and yanking, but the grip only tightened. Her smile spread unnaturally wide. Don't fight. It makes it worse. The floor beneath me seemed to soften, the wood, bending like wet paper. The hand pulled harder, dragging me toward the dark void beneath the bed. I clawed at the floorboards, splinters digging into my palms, but my legs were already halfway inside the darkness. The scent was everywhere now, thick enough to burn. Then, just as my head dipped toward that impossible black, I heard a whisper, right in my ear. It's not the house you should fear. It's what lives inside it. Something yanked me fully into the dark, and the world went silent. At first, I thought I'd gone blind. The darkness was absolute thick and smothering, swallowing even the idea of light. My body floated in. It weightless yet heavy, as though I were submerged in tar. I tried to move my arms, but they resisted. Every gesture slowed and muffled, as if through water. The scent was here too, fainter now, but sharper, as though distilled down to its most potent form. Lavender, rose, something metallic beneath. I blinked, but the blackness didn't change. Then movement, A flicker in the void just at the edge of perception. My breath quickened. The darkness rippled, and shapes began to emerge, not from light, but from absence, as if holes were being torn into the black. The first thing I saw was the rocking chair. It wasn't the one from my grandmother's room anymore. This one was skeletal, its wooden frame gnawed and warped, swaying without cause. A frayed blanket hung over its armrest, twitching faintly like it was breathing. Behind it, a doorway formed. Its frame was crooked, the wood charred as though from a fire. No light spilled from within, only more darkness, deeper than the space around me. The hand that had pulled me under appeared again, resting on the threshold. Thin, jointed wrong, skin stretched tight over sharp knuckles. Its nails scraped the frame slowly, producing a sound like teeth grinding. I tried to back away but felt another presence at my back. "Don't run," the voice murmured. I spun around. She was there, my grandmother, or the thing wearing her face, but now her features were sharper, almost human, almost. Her eyes remained pits. But her smile was gentler, as if she pitied me. "You can't leave until you see," she said. "See what?" "What the house really is." Her form flickered, and suddenly we weren't in the void anymore. I stood in the living room again, but not as it was. The furniture was older, frayed at the edges. Dust coated every surface. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing black mold blooming in jagged shape. In the corner, I saw her. The real her, my grandmother in her last years, hunched in the rocking chair. She was knitting, her eyes fixed on something unseen, her lips moving soundlessly. Every few moments, her head would jerk toward the stairs, as though listening for footsteps. I stepped closer. Her eyes darted toward me, and for a brief, horrifying second, they were filled with terror. She mouthed something quickly, desperately, but no sound came through. Then the scene shattered. The walls melted, dripping like wax, revealing the void again. "You see now?" the false grandmother said beside me. "It doesn't let you go. It feeds, it keeps you." "Why me?" My voice cracked. "Because you opened the door," she said simply. "The moment you stepped inside, it knew you." I shook my head. "No, I can fight this. I'm not staying." Her smile faded. "Everyone says that." The skeletal hand gripped my ankle again, but this time it didn't pull, it guided. I was steered toward the blackened doorway behind the rocking chair. Every instinct screamed to resist, but my legs moved as if compelled. The doorway yawned wider, the darkness inside writhing like something alive. As I crossed the threshold, cold air washed over me, carrying whispers too faint to understand. Inside was a narrow hallway that stretched impossibly far, lined with doors on either side. Each one was shut, but faint noises leaked from behind them. Prying, laughter, the sound of footsteps pacing. "This is where they stay," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Who?" "All the ones the house has taken." I reached for the nearest doorknob. It was ice cold, and when I turned it, the door swung inward to reveal a child, no older than 8, sitting cross-legged on the floor. She stared straight ahead, her eyes glassy, humming softly to herself. Around her lay dozens of toys, all worn and stained. She didn't react to me. I stepped inside. "Hey, are you okay?" No response. The false grandmother appeared in the doorway. "She's been here a long time. She doesn't remember anything else." I felt a wave of nausea. "How do I get out?" Her expression softened in a way that made it worse. "You don't, but you can make it easier." "What does that mean?" "You can choose to stop fighting. The more you resist, the more it takes from you." I backed toward the hall. "No, there's always a way out." She tilted her head. "Then you'll need to find the heart of the house, but it won't give it up willingly." The hall seemed to grow darker with her words. The whispers around me sharpened into something almost intelligible, curling against my ears in jagged syllables. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stand still. I walked, passing door after door, each one a pocket of trapped souls. Some screamed, some whispered. Some just sat in silence, eyes vacant. By the time I reached the end of the hall, my breath was shallow, my hands trembling. A final door stood there, taller than the others, its wood black and blank. The doorway before. This is it, she said behind me. I turned to face her. If I open this, do I get out? Her smile returned, small and cryptic. You'll get somewhere. The handle was warm to the touch, almost pulsing, as if alive. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and turned it. The door swung inward, and I stepped into a room I knew too well. My grandmother's bedroom. Except it wasn't hers anymore. The walls breathed. The floor shifted under my feet, swelling and sinking like a living thing. The bed was gone, replaced by a massive, pulsating mass of shadow and wood, twisting into impossible shapes. And in its center, something opened its eyes. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The thing in the center of the room wasn't simply alive, it was aware. The pulsing shapes and jagged angles formed and unformed, constantly shifting, as though it were deciding which shape would frighten me most. The eyes, if they were eyes, weren't like any humans. They were vertical slits of deep crimson, rimmed with faint gold, darting with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. The scent of lavender and roses returned, but now it was tainted rotting. Underneath, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I wanted to run, but the floor heaved again, tilting me toward it. The shadows along the walls lengthened, reaching like tendrils. Is this the heart? I managed to ask. The false grandmother's voice came from behind me, but she didn't step into view. This is the house, she said simply. Every room, every sound, every whisper, this is where it begins and ends. The eyes narrowed. I stumbled back, but the door behind me was gone. Only the breathing walls and the slow, wet sound of the floor shifting remained. The mass unfurled one of its appendages, a column of twisted wood and sinew, and set it down with a deliberate thud. Another followed. It was moving closer. What does it want? I asked, my voice shaking. Her reply came slow. It wants you to stay, to become part of it. That's all it ever wants. The appendages reached the edge of my shoes, curling slightly as if testing my resistance. I kicked at them, but the impact sent a shock of cold pain up my leg. The scent grew, stronger, choking, almost liquid in the air. My vision wavered. You can still choose, she said. Kneel, it will take you gently. You won't feel it. The thing's slitted eyes widened in a mockery of welcome. No, I whispered. The appendages shot forward, wrapping around my arms and chest. I gasped, thrashing, but their grip was unyielding cold and burning all at once. They dragged me forward, inch by inch, toward the mass's center. The closer I got, the more I realized the eyes weren't the only things watching me. Faces, hundreds of them, were half-formed in the surface of the thing, mouths opening and closing. In silent screams. Some I recognized from the hallway. I thought I saw my grandmother among them. The tendrils pulled harder, lifting me from the floor. My feet dangled, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. No, I shouted. I'm not staying here. The crimson eyes blinked slowly, almost lazily, and the tendrils tightened. I felt something press against my chest, not physically, but deeper, scraping at my thoughts, my memories. Images of my life flashed childhood afternoons in this house. My grandmother's laugh, the smell of cookies baking, my first scraped knee, her warm hands bandaging it. But the memories began to bend, warping into darker versions. Her laugh, turning into a hiss, the cookies rotting in my mouth, the bandages tightening like a garrote. The thing was rewriting me. I clenched my jaw and pushed back hard. I focused on one memory, crystal clear. The day I stood at her funeral. Clutching the flowers, refusing to cry because she had always told me to be strong. I held on to that moment like a lifeline. The tendrils faltered. The false grandmother hissed, the sound sharp and inhuman. Don't fight it. You can't win. I opened my eyes and met the thing's gaze. Watch me, summoning every ounce of strength. I twisted my body violently to the side. One of the tendrils loosened. I kicked at it, breaking free of its grip, and dropped to the shifting floor. The mass roared not with sound, but with a violent pulse that knocked me backward. The walls contracted inward like a heartbeat, trying to crush me. I scanned the room wildly. No door, no window. But at the far corner, a faint seam in the wall pulsed with a different rhythm, slower, weaker. The weak spot. The tendrils lashed at me, but I ducked and rolled across the uneven floor, feeling the cold whip of air as they missed by inches. My hands hit the seam, and I pushed. Nothing. The false grandmother's voice came from everywhere at once now. Louder, jagged. If you break it, you'll lose everything. The house will spit you out, but it will take part of you. I didn't hesitate. Better than all of me. I slammed my shoulder into the seam. A crack appeared then, but real. The mass shrieked inside my head, the sound like glass grinding on bone. The floor bucked under me, and I almost lost my footing. Tendrils whipped around my waist, yanking me back, but I drove my elbow into the seam again. The crack widened, and light-blinding, white, impossible poured through. The tendrils recoiled instantly, writhing in pain. I shoved my hand into the opening, feeling warmth and air on the other side. The house's heart convulsed, the faces in its surface distorting into raw agony. The false grandmother appeared, one last time, standing between me and the light. Her eyes were hollow, her voice almost pleading. Don't leave me alone in here. For a moment, just a moment, I almost stopped. Then I shoved past her and into the light. The light swallowed me whole. It wasn't warm like sunlight. It was searing pure, scouring every inch of me as if stripping away layers I didn't even know I had. My thoughts scattered. My heartbeat roared in my ears, and I wasn't sure if I was falling or being pulled upward. When my eyes adjusted, I was lying on my back in the middle of the living room. The air was still, heavy with that same old lavender and rose scent, but faint now, like a memory fading. The coffee table was overturned, the rug askew, boxes strewn in a mess as if something had torn through them. The perfume bottle was gone. I sat up slowly, scanning the room for movement. Nothing. No sound from upstairs. No creak of the stairs. Just the ticking of the old wall clock, a sound I hadn't heard since arriving. For a second I thought maybe it really had let me go. I went to the front door. The lock was back, the brass glinting faintly. I gripped it and turned. It clicked open without resistance. When I stepped outside, the world looked normal. The streetlights hummed softly. The wind stirred the branches overhead. A car passed in the distance. I breathed in the cool night air like it was my first breath in hours. I walked to the sidewalk, refusing to look back. But at the end of the block, I stopped. The house was dark, its windows blank, the front porch still and quiet. But in the upstairs bedroom window, the one that had been my grandmother's, I thought I saw the rocking chair move. Just once. I left without checking twice. The following days were a blur. I stayed in a motel 3 towns over, avoiding mirrors and dark corners. My dreams were a mess of shifting walls, black slitted eyes, and my grandmother's voice whispering things I couldn't quite make out. By the 4th night, I told myself I had to go back. Not inside, not ever again, but to see it. To prove it was just a house, empty and harmless now. When I arrived, the street was quiet. Except the house wasn't empty. The lights in the living room glowed faintly. I froze on the sidewalk, my stomach twisting. A shadow passed across the curtain, tall and deliberate. Someone was in there. I should have walked away. But I couldn't. My feet carried me up the walkway until I was standing on the porch again, staring at the front door. The brass lock was gone, replaced by smooth wood. My hand hovered over it, not touching, not knocking. The faintest scent of lavender drifted through the air. I stepped back. A voice, faint, almost drowned by the sound of the wind, came from the other side of the door. You came back. My chest tightened. I'm not staying, I said. The voice chuckled, low and knowing. You never left. Something moved behind me. A shift in the air, a shadow that hadn't been there before. I turned and saw the street, the houses, the trees, all frozen in perfect stillness, like a photograph. The world outside had stopped. The light in the living room flickered. In the upstairs window, the rocking chair moved again, steady, rhythmic. My pulse hammered. I backed toward the street, my eyes locked on the house. The scent grew stronger. The front door creaked open, not wide, just enough to show darkness inside, deep and waiting. And from that darkness came a whisper, warm and close, though no one stood there. "We're patient." The door shut, silent as a sigh. The streetlights flickered back to life. The trees swayed again. A car passed, its headlights cutting briefly across my face before disappearing. The house stood quiet, its windows blank. I didn't wait to see if the rocking chair moved again. I left, and I meant it this time. But even now, weeks later, the scent sometimes follows me, in hallways, in closed rooms. On still nights when the wind pauses for just a second too long. I never see it, not really. But sometimes, I think it's watching me from somewhere I can't reach, waiting for the day I stop running.